We are now going to begin our town hall meeting. At this time, I'm going to introduce to some and present to others the angel of this great house, none other than my pastor, Pastor DJ Kreiner.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. All right. So we are in a Baptist church. That means you have to respond. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. So good evening, everyone. Do me a favor and just look at the person next to you. Tell them it's good to sit by you. All right. Now, that's the person I told you to speak to. Now turn to the person you actually like and tell them it's good to sit by you. Tell them it's good to sit by you. It's good to sit by you. Sit, H, sit. It is another day's journey, and we are absolutely glad and honored that you are here with us as our District 3 leader, our councilman, has brought us all together along with a majority of many of our leaders in our city just to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what's going on, that there are no misconceptions of what's going on for this great city called Fresno, California. Amen? Before we get started, I want to welcome you to this fine house. This is a magnificent church that has historical roots to it, even from the days of Pastor White to the great Moses of our church and of this area, Pastor Chester Riggins, to Pastor Scott, and now to this little skinny brother that you have in front of you as the senior pastor. But we want to welcome you. We thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be here. We honor our councilman for allowing this church to be of use. We thank Danielle for all the work that she has done. And, of course, our former mayor and our sister, Mayor Swearingen, for all the work that they've done as well for this night to be possible. Are there any dignitaries or we have any city leaders that are in the house, elected officials? If you wouldn't mind standing just so that our community can see you, could you just stand real quick? All elected officials, if you're here, would you please stand just so that we can have a chance to see you? Can you give it up for our elected officials, please? Thank you so very much for coming. Thank you so much. We know those that have worked real hard today because they stood up slow, and then those that didn't work at all, like Eric, stood up real fast. And so we're just grateful that you're here, man. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Payne, for the work that you did yesterday. Thank you for the work you did yesterday. Today we are going to be moderated by one of this country's magnificent pastors, leaders, has a powerful, deep voice that scares so many people into being saved to the Spirit of the Lord. He is what we call the Papa Bear of all preachers and the father of many preachers and my spiritual father in the ministry. He will be our moderator tonight. And if you wouldn't mind, help me welcome Pastor Paul Binion. And Pastor Binion will introduce and welcome our councilman.
Well, good evening, family. Good evening, everybody. We're happy to see all of you who are here for what we believe will be a night not only of information, but also inspiration, but also a night of clarity. I needn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyhow because I have the microphone. One of the things that marks us as a people is our civility, gentility, dignity, grace, and politeness. I heard one half of amen. And so I want to say that even as we come together as a community, we are not going to exempt ourselves from the way that we interact one with another. And so we're going to hear from our councilman, also hear from a very special guest, and then we're going to receive questions, and they're going to respond to your questions. We're also going to honor the time frame, which has been allotted to us tonight. But again, we're very happy to see all of you here, and we trust that you leave here tonight with your mind settled, your questions answered, and with clarity in where we're going and what direction that we are partaking upon. Allow me this time to introduce the councilman for this district, Mr. Oliver Baines. Please come.
All right. Well, good evening to everyone, and I promise to make my remarks short because we certainly want to get to our special guest. But let me first certainly say a few thank yous that are in order. First off, I want to certainly thank my dear friend and pastor of this house, Pastor DJ Kreiner, for allowing us to use your church home tonight. We certainly appreciate you for opening up your doors to our community tonight for clarity and understanding. So thank you, Pastor. We appreciate that. Absolutely. Worth an applause. Certainly want to thank my pastor, for agreeing to moderate this event tonight. And like has already been mentioned by Pastors Kreiner and Pastor Binion, the idea for this, just so everyone can jump in my head just for a moment, the idea for this event tonight was to bring clarity to something that is slightly confusing. And I can tell you that I'm probably as confused as a lot of you are. And we asked a very special guest here, the executive director of the Strategic Growth Council, to come and shed clarity and light for our community today. There's been a lot of ideas swirling around about what TCC is, what it is not, what it can be used for, what it cannot be used for. And we thought, at least I did, and a few of us thought, that the best way to shed light on that was to actually ask the person who was helping to craft the program to come and talk to us and to give us as a community an opportunity to ask questions and gain clarity. So, Randall, I want to thank you so much as well for he came all the way from Sacramento with his staff here, Daniela, tonight, to come and just talk to our community. Randall, we thank you as a Fresnan, as a council member of this district. We thank you for coming here to spend this night with us. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. Yes, absolutely. And then I also get to get the distinct honor and pleasure of welcoming a dear friend, a great leader, to come and share a few remarks with you all tonight. So I get a chance to welcome Dr. Joaquina Rambula up here, who is my assembly member and many of yours as well. And let me just say that Dr. Rambula is in his first term serving in the California State Legislature as the assembly member of the 31st District. But let me tell you, the impact that he has had already for us here in the Valley has been tremendous. I'll be honest with you. I don't know of another elected that has hit the ground running quite like you, Dr. Rambula, and made the impact as quickly as you had in just a short time. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to call him a friend, and it's truly an honor and a pleasure that you represent me and that you are my assembly member. So without any further ado, I want to welcome a great leader, Dr. Joaquina Rambula.
I'd like to thank Oliver Baines, Councilmember Baines, for convening this town hall, and for St. Brest Baptist Church and Pastor Kreiner for hosting us. I also want to thank Randall Winston from coming down from the Strategic Growth Council for coming to Fresno to provide more information on transformative climate communities. I was lucky enough to be elected last April, just in time to participate in the discussions about funding the TCC program. It was the culmination of a lot of hard work by locals in Fresno, and the funding for this program is an acknowledgement that climate change has a significant and unique impact on California's most disadvantaged communities. I am proud of this significant accomplishment. The $70 million allocated for Fresno is historic, and it's an opportunity to invest state funds and leverage additional private funds into our most disadvantaged areas. I am pleased that we were able to get the largest portion of the TCC funding, and it represents an opportunity for us to lead the state in addressing climate change in disadvantaged communities while creating partnerships and economic opportunities for our community. I look forward to hearing about where the Strategic Growth Council is in development of the state guidelines and the timeline for adoption of these guidelines. As we provide input and put forward projects for funding, we need to keep in mind that the guidelines being developed are statewide guidelines, and that the SGC has to balance the interests of Fresno, Los Angeles, and other disadvantaged communities like San Bernardino. The SGC has held public workshops around the state to seek statewide input. However, I think it is important that the guidelines work for Fresno, because we are the recipient of the largest portion of the funds. And if the program is successful here, we will be in line for additional funds in the coming years. Also, we must keep in mind that the money for TCC has to be directly linked to greenhouse gas reductions, because the funding comes from the Greenhouse Reduction Fund. So while we should be creative in designing projects that benefit our local community, we must keep in mind the limitations placed on these funds. I appreciate Mr. Winston's participation in tonight's town hall so he can help us better understand what types of projects will be eligible for funding, the status of the guideline development, and what the timeline is for the adoption of the guidelines. I thank you for sending me to Sacramento to be your humble public servant. It's truly an honor to fight on all of your behalf, and I'm honored to be here tonight. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Assemblyman. At this time, I'd like to bring to the podium, let us welcome Mr. Randall Winston, Executive Director of the California Strategic Growth Council. Welcome, Mr. Winston.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Pastor Binion, Pastor Kreiner, Councilmember Baines, Assemblymember Rambla, and everyone here. I should say first and foremost that it is an honor to be here. I think we more than happily are willing to make not just the trip, but to reiterate the point that this is unprecedented for the state of California. Never before have we administered a program like this. Never before have we tried to achieve the goals that we are trying to achieve in such a way. And so it's, I think, incumbent upon us as the Strategic Growth Council in the state of California and you all here to be on the same page as we embark upon expending these funds, I think, in the best way possible together. So with that, I'm going to dive right in here into, I think, what you all were handed out, which is a presentation. And really, I'll echo again some of the comments that Councilmember Baines and Assemblymember Arambula mentioned about maybe some misunderstanding or a need for more information and clarity about what transformative climate community is, what it's not, and what it means. I'll do this just by walking through 5 questions. So what is transformative climate communities? Why was Fresno selected? Which geographies are eligible? Who can apply for the funds? And what is the program timeline and process? So first, what is transformative climate communities? Last fall, in September, the governor signed, after the championship and authorship of a number of members, AB 2722. These members of the Assembly included Assemblymember Burke, Assemblymember Rodriguez, and of course, your very own Assemblymember Arambula, who, as you all know, joins us this evening and has been an incredible champion for the city in such a short time. I'm just going to read what the language says directly. Created the Transformative Climate Community Program to be administered by the Strategic Growth Council to fund the development and implementation of neighborhood-level transformative climate community plans that include multiple coordinated greenhouse gas emissions reduction projects that provide local economic, environmental, and health benefits to disadvantaged communities as described in that section of the Health and Safety Code. And we'll get to that a little bit later. I'm going to quickly provide a program overview, though, before I get to some of the other points of clarification. So if we could move just to the next slide here on program overview. Again, just a quick rundown. There are $140 million available this year in funding. At a high level, the program seeks to focus on the most disadvantaged communities in the state. We are taking a place-based approach to transformation. This means drawing from the context and participation of stakeholders such as all of yourselves. Third, integrated climate strategies, meaning multiple projects together, and we'll get into this a little bit later. And also collaborative partnerships. So not about one person or one entity coming forward with a project, but a partnership that consists of multiple entities coming together to think through projects and endeavors that transform a community. We have both implementation grants and planning grants. For the implementation grants of that $140 million, $70 million in Fresno, $35 million in Los Angeles, and $35 million in a third location yet to be determined by the Strategic Growth Council. Planning grants, we have approximately $1.5 million available for 5 to 10 planning grants statewide. There's an important distinction here to make. The implementation dollars, as mentioned earlier by the Assembly member, are focused in on greenhouse gas reduction because they are funded by the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund of the state of California. The planning grants can be used for planning activities, which means not necessarily capital projects, the bricks and mortar stuff, as it were. Now, $70 million is not a whole lot of money when we're talking about integrated, complex projects. And it won't be able to achieve everything that we would like to see, but it can be and needs to be a catalyst. This means leveraging other types of monies and resources to create longer-term and sustainable transformation. And again, we want to see these funds not just this year, but in future years. And to do that, we need to show the success of this funds this year. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the nature of the program itself here in the next slide, but I want to make a clear point to the fact that we are still developing the program guidelines. This money has not been earmarked or awarded to a specific grantee or a specific project. There will be a competitive process to award the grant to a single grantee, a single partnership here in Fresno. Again, there will be a competitive process to award the $70 million to a single grantee or partnership here in Fresno. Now we have, however, even though we're still in the process of developing the guidelines, through our guidelines and through policy, articulated the state's priorities and the direction of the program through a rulemaking process and what we are calling our draft scoping guidelines. So that being said, let me walk quickly kind of through some thresholds and the previous slide, my apologies. Thresholds and program framework. I'm moving slowly. I'll speed it up. So to even get in the door, insofar as the revised guidelines right now, we are putting forth the necessity of meeting the following thresholds. So preventing displacement of existing residents and businesses, ensuring community engagement, leveraging funding, which I mentioned earlier, and tracking and monitoring greenhouse gas emission reductions and other indicators. So we don't just want to see this money sort of be invested and then walk away from it as the state. We will hold entities accountable to achieving outcomes associated with reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is part of our state's climate goals, as well as other indicators or benefits that the community can define. And this gets to the program framework, which is intended to be, again, a place-based framework. And that chart you see there on the right, I won't go into too much detail because this is going to come from, or is intended to come from, the applicant to the program. It's the community that will determine goals, specific strategies, specific projects, and ways to measure those projects that make up a transformative plan. So that will come from the applicant. We are just setting the parameters. So what could this actually look like? And now I'm going to get into the next slide here with neighborhood, talking about neighborhood level transformation. I'll make a brief remark here about a lot of the state's programs currently are kind of siloed off into individual pieces. They're run by one department or another department. You've got funds in different places and not oftentimes thought holistically or together, achieving more than just one benefit. So we are looking to see a combination of projects. It could include everything from affordable housing, transit, active transportation, urban forestry, parks and greening, renewable energy and energy efficiency. The list could go on, but the nexus needs to be with reducing greenhouse gas emissions and attracting private and other investment. We do want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we also understand that there are many other goals that we would like to see achieved and that need to be achieved in this community. And so the state is also requiring her to give match for the dollars, for that $70 million that we are awarding, or will be awarding, and through the explicit achievement of other benefits. These include benefits like workforce training and economic development. Workforce training and economic development is a new area insofar as the state's climate investments. It is not something that heretofore the state has included as a measurable and meaningful component with our climate investments until now. So we would like to see the creation of educational opportunities and workforce training, as well as the environment for business expansion and entrepreneurship for local residents to create high-quality career path jobs. That is also a component of this one integrated investment that we are making. Let me move to the next question here, which is an important one. Why was Fresno selected? Now, the legislation that created this program, I mentioned, was signed in September, last fall, in September 2016. Shortly thereafter, the SGC released its first regulation for the program. So this is important to recognize. When the legislation was initially passed, no city had been named. Not Fresno, not LA, not any jurisdiction. The SGC said transformative climate community program funds shall be allocated in the cities of Los Angeles, Fresno, and a third location, and designated Fresno specifically to receive a minimum of half of those funds. Now, why was that the case? We know through the state's own tools that Fresno does have the largest per capita population living in the most disadvantaged communities in the state. And this is subsequent to a tool called CalEnviroScreen. Now, I want to take a moment here to acknowledge some history on multiple fronts. Suburban sprawl has consumed much of Fresno, and there is now both an economically distressed urban core and historic neighborhoods like West Fresno that contain some of the highest concentrations of poverty in the nation and rank among the highest on CalEnviroScreen in terms of disadvantage. We also acknowledge local leadership that led to Fresno's new general plan, directing growth to infill areas and reversing the pattern of sprawl, helping to support growth around California's high-speed rail. Now, high-speed rail, I must note, is one of the single largest infrastructure investments in California's history. It's a priority for Governor Brown and essential to reaching our state climate goals. We're now in the midst of needing to weave together these host of concerns and investments and really opportunities. And that is not the challenge, but the opportunity before us now. Next question here. So which geographies are eligible? I mentioned the top, the most disadvantaged communities, or the top 5% of disadvantaged communities in the state. Here in Fresno, this map depicts the 40 census tracts that are eligible according to CalEnviroScreen 2.0. And just to, again, explain CalEnviroScreen, it uses environmental, health, and socioeconomic data to indicate communities impacted by pollution. Those census tracts could be break down further. Again, this is just the top 5%, 40 census tracts in Fresno, according to Cal Enviro Screen 2.0, that are eligible for the program. Next question. So who can apply for the funds? In terms of applicant eligibility, and I mentioned this earlier, we are looking for diverse teams with multiple organizations and stakeholders, including residents like all of you, public entities, community-based organizations, private entities, foundations, academic institutions. The list could go on, and we aren't necessarily going to prescribe every single partner or player in that partnership, but a partnership is the point here. Consistency with existing plans. This is existing plans that have been passed already by the city, and a demonstrated capacity to implement those plans. So we need to be able to have entities who have experience overseeing and managing large infrastructure projects. Strong and diverse community support and participation. I mentioned this earlier, but the ability to leverage additional financing. And finally, the ability to track and report on outcomes. I'm going to move to the program timeline and process, and I'll move here pretty quickly. I know I'm kind of running short on time, but this is another important piece. So our tentative program timeline now, and this is just to walk you through it. We mentioned what happened earlier with the release of scoping guidelines in November, the approval of the rulemaking designating Fresno in December. I'll jump to where we are right now, where we have a new set of revised scoping guidelines on the street. We'll release an updated version of those guidelines next month, and we anticipate being able to post final program guidelines in July. The approval of the final guidelines, you'll see, is still to be determined, and that's because through the legislature, we need to get what's called an exemption from the Administrative Procedure Act, which is essentially a process that would take much longer than what we would like to see take place for approving this program. So the intention is for the program to be finalized by July and to thereafter go out with a call for applications. And for the tentative application process, and the last slide here, we'll call for proposals. We'll have a deadline for submission of those concept proposals. And there's really sort of two parts, both concept proposal and full application. And we'll announce invites to full application after a concept proposal process, and a deadline for full application, and then announce awards. And I can say here that tentatively, if the timeline goes as we'd like to see happen, by the end of the year, being able to make fully wrap up the award process, and planning grants following a similar timeline. So with that, I want to thank you again all for your patience in walking through the presentation, and I'm looking forward here with my colleagues to a robust dialogue. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Okay, this works good. So what we're going to do, before we get to a couple of audience questions, we're going to give you all an opportunity to ask some questions in a minute. But because I'm hosting, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a few questions myself, if that's okay. Randall, if you can have a seat right here. And Pastor, I'm handing this to you because I know you guys are going to need to field a couple questions. And so I realized that I listened. A lot of people ask me questions, Randall, about TCC, and I realized that I had some of the basic questions that many people in the community have, and certainly appreciate you walking through the presentation. But I just want to almost ask the most basic of questions, like, how did all this really come about? So I know you kind of walked us through it, but what really is driving this, and how did it all really come about?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can explain that a bit in a little more kind of a straightforward way. So, so we've got these things called our climate investments. The Transformative Climate Communities Program is one of about over a dozen different programs. They've been around for about 2 years now. I think after the first year, this is well before Transformative Climate Communities, after the first year with some of those programs going out the door, we heard from community members, from stakeholders, from many people in this room and leaders in this room that, hey, look, the state, you guys are operating in a really siloed, kind of one-off way. You have a program that allows for maybe urban forestry here, maybe a park here, maybe some affordable housing here. They're all run by different departments and agencies. They all have different timelines and requirements. None of this is being thought of, and again, I'm kind of echoing what community members and stakeholders told us, none of this is being coordinated in a integrated way, and integrated in such a fashion as to make kind of the sum greater than each of the parts, right? Really accelerating the benefits that can come from these investments. That conversation is what really led to this program. How can we think bigger? We have, right here in California, the most ambitious climate goals, greenhouse gas reduction goals in the nation. And there was a sense that our programs, the way that we were spending our cap and trade dollars, weren't yet kind of living up to that ambition. This program was meant to live up to that ambition, creating a, not just statewide, but I think we hope a global model for thinking through highly integrated investments and doing it in the most disadvantaged parts of the state.
And so it's interesting. I hear you use that word integration a lot. And I think, I'm going to see if we can tease that out just a little bit for my own clarity and hopefully for some other folks here. When you say integration, kind of talk me through what you mean when you say integration. So for instance, can a project, a TCC project that's potentially going to get funded, can I just fix my my curbs in front of my house? Can I just put solar on a roof? Is that what you're talking about? I think we all want to know, what do you mean when you say integrated?
That's another very good question. And we aren't talking about the single person or entity coming forward and saying, I need to fix this or that, like a sidewalk or a similar example. What we're really talking about, number one, I mentioned the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions.
So a project has to demonstrate that it's going to reduce greenhouse gases.
Absolutely. The project has to demonstrate that it has to reduce greenhouse gas. So let me give you one example. So one of the programs that we've managed beforehand, and this is maybe hopefully straightforward enough to kind of wrap one's head around it, funds affordable housing and transit. So history of that program, in a word or two, we would not fund just affordable housing. There's lots of affordable housing programs. They're great. That's not the purpose of these dollars or this money. We always say it is affordable housing and transit. The whole idea is to get folks closer to transit and modes of transportation that get them out of their single passenger car, get them taking buses, transit, walking, biking, ways that reduce the number of vehicle miles traveled and in turn greenhouse gas emission reductions. That's one example of two things being linked, transit and housing, because it's getting at the goal that we want to see. TCC, the program that we're talking about today, does that times 10 plus, times 100. So we're talking about linking not just housing and transportation, but parks, greening, green infrastructure, other types of investments that can, to put it in a kind of a straightforward way, not just sort of create more sustainable communities, but sort of accelerate the sustainability of those communities and how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there's that, and there's the capital piece. But let me answer just one more piece about integrated projects. I think this is important. So there's all these capital components. So it's not just about sort of repairing a sidewalk, but thinking holistically about the investments themselves, energy, water, other ways to reduce emissions. It's also what's sort of referred to as maybe co-benefits or other benefits that don't necessarily have to do with the capital investments themselves, like workforce training. How are we making sure that the jobs and other opportunities created through these investments actually benefit the residents and communities in which they're going and those who are most impacted. And And I'll be straightforward in saying that's something that we're thinking through in a pretty detailed way, and some steps for the first time through our guidelines.
Right, and I'll take a moment to brag just for a minute. The city of Fresno tied a project labor agreement directly to the expenditure of these funds, hoping to again, anticipate the high priority of workforce development. As many of you in here know, workforce development, major component of things that I care about. So I'm very happy to hear that the SGC and the TCC funding it has a workforce development expectation tied to this as well. So, and I see my friend Dr. Rambula shaking his head vigorously over here when they signed the bill in Fresno. I know that was a big part of what the Dr. Rambula pushed for as well. Talk to me a little, and only a couple more questions, because I know some folks here have some questions as well, and we certainly want to allow them the opportunity to ask while we have you here. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned in one of the slides, and one of the early ones, about the governor's priority, and you mentioned about high-speed rail and high-speed rail being a priority. How does high-speed rail fit into this? I know I get that question all the time, like high-speed rail, yes, high-speed rail, no. Is it about high-speed rail? Is it not? Help us understand. It was mentioned. How does high-speed rail fit into this whole thing?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. I think, I'll answer it directly first. So in our current revised guidelines, there is mention of the high-speed rail and a prioritization of the high-speed rail. I'll say maybe two things about that. Number one, the state has invested a tremendous amount of money as it is in high-speed rail, and beyond and before transformative climate communities. It is a critical component in terms of the climate goals that we've established for the state, reaching a certain level of greenhouse gas emissions by now 2030 and 2050, and moving to sort of changing mobility patterns, how people get around regionally and across California. So I want to reiterate that importance because when we talk about transformation, we can talk about transformation in a lot of ways. It has obviously an immediate impact in terms of people's lives and changing people's lives. There's also the context of transformation when thinking about the state of California and how folks travel, and I think high-speed rail fits into that. That being said, I think from the first set of guidelines to the revised set of guidelines, there was some specificity about the investment from TCC only being limited to a one mile radius around the high-speed rail. We've received a tremendous amount of feedback on that, and negative, positive, both ways. I can say that we're going through a process right now as state agencies and listening to and working in all of the public comments. So that is also an issue that I think when we release guidelines later in May, you'll see those comments, and the whole sweep of comments taken to heart. And I think that right now, in deference to the sort of public process, that's probably maybe the best way to couch it.
All right. Well, I just want to say from what I gather, and here's something that I pulled away from here that maybe I didn't appreciate as much until your presentation, is the importance of the fully integrated project. So it doesn't sound like, as I hear it, that there are going to be 100 people coming in with a project to put some solar on the roof, or somebody to fix my curb or sidewalks or what have you, or fix the street. It sounds like, as I'm hearing this, that you all are really looking for maybe a suite of projects that all tie together. And as I'm hearing, I'm really wanting to get the integration piece. You mentioned that so much, and I want to make sure that I'm hearing that right, and also that my community's hearing that right, is that the integration portion of what you all are expecting is amongst some of the highest priorities. Yes, and I would not only reiterate that, but also make the point that we recognize that that's not easy. This is not meant to be an easier, straightforward program from the standpoint of how the state manages it, and the expectation that we are kind of almost investing
by, through our own time and resources in communities and different stakeholders across different, jurisdictions or whatever the case may be, coming together to work through that integration. Integration takes partnership, takes collaboration, takes work. And I think we want to be here as SGC to facilitate that to the extent that we can. So yes, you are absolutely right.
All right, well, thank you, Randall. And what I'm going to do now is ask Pastors Binion and Kreiner to, if you raise your hand, we're going to field questions for Randall from us in the community that may need further clarity about what TCC is. So Pastors Binion and Kreiner will get your questions out. So it looks like we have a, yeah.
Allow me to say this, though. We're going to ask you, dear hearts, to ask a question. We're not here tonight. It's not the appropriate time for commentary. I'm going to ask you to direct a question to Mr. Winston and also to the councilman. A particular question, please, and they will answer it. And I'm sure you may have another question, but we want everybody here to have an opportunity to ask a question, and then we'll come around again. Is that all right? Okay.
Thank you, Pastor. Good afternoon to my Councilman Baines, and to Congress, Ms. Winston. My name is Hester Hensley, and the reason I wanted to go early is that I have another engagement that I need to be at. But my question is to North Fresno and East Fresno and all other parts of Fresno besides West Fresno, if you would take a look around and have a heart to say that Southwest Fresno need help in getting, the question is to look around and see what we need. I think that other parts of Fresno has a lot of advantages over Southwest Fresno, and we've been the disadvantaged community in a lot of things. We have been disadvantaged in a lot of things. So just asking that you would look and see and help out Southwest Fresno for the whatever monies that's going to be allocated, that we would be fairly treated in getting the monies to Southwest Fresno. Thank you.
And I'll just maybe reply quickly to that kind of comment and question. So yes, we do intend to treat everyone fairly in terms of our process and how we are engaging all stakeholders in understanding that process and ultimately applying. I'll say that we're trying to spend as much time as we can here. This is I think the third or fourth time at least in a kind of town hall or workshop type setting where we've had a chance to hear from community members such as yourself. So we are listening. We are absolutely listening, and thank you for your comment.
Yes, my name is Francisco Mendez. I live on the west side here in Fresno, District 3, where Mr. Our leader right here is. And I have some issues to talk about it. I've been there for about 22 years, Jensen and Fruit. And there is nothing changed. It's the same thing. We have been asking city leaders, council members for help, plant more trees, cut the air pollution, and we don't have really green parks for our kids. We have Hyde Parks, used to be a garbage disposal, is closed. It's only small hill there. We have another park near my house on West and Jensen. It's also one of the first parks built here in California. I mean, garbage disposals.
Brother, we need you. So everyone, no disrespect, don't mean to cut you off, but we need you to ask a specific question so that we can answer the question so that everyone can be heard, okay?
Thank you.
Need to just ask your question real quick, my friend, please.
My point is that we need real parks and trees so we can live longer on the west side, also all over California.
Hi, my name is Diane Smith, and I live in Southwest Fresno. And my biggest concern, and the question is that there's been much talk that it has to be within a 1-mile radius of a major transportation hub. Well, when you put that hub around high-speed rail, that's eliminating most of this area, which is a prime reason that the money is coming here. So my question is how do we bring that together? Because what I heard at one meeting is they said, well, once we do that, it's going to be a domino effect. Then that would bring other people in. Well, I've been over here for 30 years, and there's been no domino effect. So I want to know what the difference is this time, and why does it have to be centered specifically around high-speed well, which actually eliminates the area, one of the most disadvantaged areas there is in Fresno.
That's a very good question. I'm going to answer it in a few ways. So first of all, I should say that we are still revising the program guidelines. So what you have heard about this 1-mile radius around high-speed rail is in our current draft. We've not finalized the program yet. We heard comments similar to the one that you just made about communities in and outside of that radius. We're now taking those comments into our revision process, and we will come out with updated guidelines in the month. So just to be clear, that what's in the guideline, the draft right now guidelines is still draft, and we have not made a decision one way or the other about geographies or the program framework. It's in the draft guidelines. So that number one. And your point as well is well taken, and we are listening again to those comments. The high-speed rail prioritization, this goes to the comment that I made earlier about the state's goals around climate, but at the same time trying to balance that with the reality of where the most disadvantaged communities are. It is a very tough bridge to cross and a very tough situation to balance, which is why we are listening and working to refine our guidelines accordingly. So your comment, or question, I take to heart as a comment, and will take again to our process in finalizing the program. So a decision has not been made yet on the projects, where the money is going. We are finalizing the guidelines still. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston, for coming to Fresno. My name is Mary Curry. I'm a 60-year-plus resident of West Fresno. I've never lived any place else in Fresno but West Fresno. But my question is, given the collaborative program that you mentioned, most community organizations are not in a position or would not be in a position to do matching funds. So how will we collaborate with the city? Because that's apparently where we're going to end up with, and have them to recognize the desperate needs of West Fresno as opposed to just the high-speed rail. We know that's important, but it's also important to take care of the community that's been benignly neglected for many, many years. So how do we work with someone who has the matching funds? Because most community organizations don't have matching funds.
Mm-hmm. Another very good question, and I think a balancing act on our part. Number one, mention collaboration, and we recognize that community-based organizations, many of them, don't necessarily have the capacity to be able to meet the leverage that we are in a draft way saying in our revised guidelines. Number one, the state will come forward and are coming forward to provide technical assistance and capacity building to provide support on that front. So this is to be able to both meet and provide additional leveraging of funds. And we will have a technical assistance program that will proceed when the guidelines are finalized. But more broadly, I think I want to say, number two, that while we understand the challenge to leverage, I think without it, we do believe that some of the transformation that we want to see is not going to be possible. Now, I don't want to speak to the nature of partnerships as they exist. I know that there's trust that needs to be built and partnerships that absolutely need to be strengthened, kind of getting at what you're touching upon. And we are here as the state as well to serve as a party in that process. This is $70 million. It is a substantial investment, and we too do not want to see it fail. This isn't a one-time investment where we sort of make the investment and walk away, but it is it will be a multi-year funded partners where we hope to stand and intend to stand hand in hand with both community-based organizations and whoever else comes forward by way of a partnership to apply in meeting both the leverage requirements and other goals. But thank you for your comment and question.
Oh, wow, this is loud. Mr. Winston, to kind of tail back on Ms. Curry's question, does Fresno submit one Fresno proposal? Like, so you've covered a little bit of like housing, transportation, workforce readiness. Are there multiple proposals that can tie in, or is it just one Fresno overall proposal?
So the application process is competitive. We will award the TCC grant, $70 million, to one proposal. The proposal can include multiple project types. So one team, one partnership, will receive the funds, but it could include multiple components, if that answers your question, hopefully. Good question as well.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Gary Hunt. I came to Sacramento to see you a couple of weeks ago, and I'm back here.
Sorry.
Hey, how you doing? It's good to see you. It's good to see that you made it in town. You had a lot to say in Sacramento when we were there, and a lot of information was given. And I'm glad you're here to see for yourself what we're dealing with. It's funny because I'm going to call it what it is, the elephant's in the room, and I'm going to acknowledge it. We deal with environmental racism here, as do a lot of poor communities or African-American communities. And the disparity of life expectancy between West Fresno and North Fresno is 25 years. So those of us who live in the 93706 have a 25-year life expectancy that's cut shorter than those who live in the other zip codes out north. On saying that, I think with what you're proposing is great. The state's proposing a great plan with the $70 million. Okay, my question is, how can you see to it that we do receive the fundings to do the things that we need to do here in West Fresno on the 93706, rather than it going to one proportion of a town that doesn't really need to do what we need to do here? Because the pollution is totally off the chain here, and we need to do something about it.
Yes. So another very good question, set of comments. I'll say first that I wouldn't want to set up the expectation that these $70 million, which again are not a whole lot of money when looked at, I think from the scale and history of need and maybe challenges, wouldn't want to set up the expectation that it can kind of serve as a panacea or a solve-all for every issue facing this part of the city and other parts of the city. This is a catalyst. This is a set of funds that I think, if leveraged appropriately, can hopefully achieve a lot of the elements and challenges that you were describing. So that number one, basically setting of expectations. Number two, what I'll say is that we are designing our guidelines to help ensure that we are that our investments, wherever they do go, wherever they end up going, that we are holding the parties accountable for achieving the outcomes with regard to health, greenhouse gas reduction, workforce training and economic development, and some of the equity elements, and I'll say it as well, elements of environmental racism that you're speaking to. Is that going to be not just challenging, but probably incredibly challenging? Yes. Are we stepping into a situation where there has been conflict? Yes. Are we trying to be open-eyed about that? Yes. We're going to do the best that we can as a state agency, responsible to a host of state agencies who make up my council, appointed by the governor, and we're going to do what we can. We're going to need, obviously, individuals like you as part of the endeavor. A lot of what you're asking, I don't want to pretend to have all of the answers to, but we have an incredible amount of optimism, and we've got time, and we've got money. Thank you.
Good evening. Over here. My name is Luisa Medina. I spoke briefly with you in March in Madera and expressed some of the concerns that you're hearing this evening, and I assure you you're going to continue to hear. Looking at your slides here on thresholds and program framework, ensuring community engagement is one of those points. So my question to you is, what are you going to do? You just spoke about accountability. So my question goes to accountability as well. And what metrics are you looking at using or to determine that there is, in fact, viable, meaningful community engagement throughout this process? How will you evaluate that overall? Thank you.
A very good question, one that we're also diving into further at present, and my colleague Daniela here can speak to even further. So I'll answer it in a couple of ways. One, we certainly want to acknowledge the existing planning efforts that have taken place both here in Fresno and other parts of the state, which have involved tremendous amounts of community engagement and participation, and that we hope will feed into TCC. That being said, your question is really about kind of accountability moving forward. How is the state SGCR partners, how are we going to kind of hold whatever entities apply accountable to that engagement? We are exploring doing so in a number of ways. So the revised guidelines currently require a collaborative stakeholder partnership in which relationships with regard to all entities at the table, community-based organizations and others, the roles and responsibilities are well defined. We have offered examples like memorandums of understanding, community agreements, essentially forms of agreement between all the parties at a table, including community groups, that we, the state, can then track and put in place measures if the modes of accountability of those agreements are not met. So I think we want to make sure that up front, before the money even goes out the door, there's an understanding between all the parties applying about how we are going to hold those groups accountable. And then we will develop also indicators, and we're in the process of developing that now, but indicators to measure that community engagement over time. Again, we aren't seeing this as sort of a one-year investment and then we walk away, but 3 to 5 years plus, and hopefully more funds. This will depend upon, cap and trade and some other things that we'll see, but we hope to see the investment of additional funds beyond just this year. Thank you.
Hello, right here in front of you. Name's Darren Miller. I'll be back.
Good evening. My name is Debbie Darden, longtime resident of Southwest Fresno and advocate. The question I have is, the first meeting that was held was downtown at the State Building, and when this was first introduced to us, they talked about the funds, but it was stated that any agency or organization or community resident who borrowed some of this money, filled out the application and was accepted, they would have to match those funds. So if you borrowed $5 million, you'd have to have $5 million to match. We like to know, does that still stand? And if so, how does that benefit 93706 in Southwest Fresno when we're dealing with the poverty percentage that we have in our community?
Another very good question. So I think the meeting that you're talking about downtown took place in the fall, and we've gone through 2 rounds of our revised guidelines. The first set of guidelines, that were released back in November of 2016 said that applicants would need to leverage funding 100%, so a 1-for-1 match. As you said, if it's $5 million, then you need to have leverage with another $5 million. We heard a lot of feedback on that component and others, and in our revised guidelines that were released in February, that match was lowered to 50%. So if you come in with $5 million, you need $2.5 million to meet the leverage requirement. We continue to get a lot of feedback on that. And again, we're still revising the guidelines. Nothing is final. But that being said, I think to your last question, and I'll answer it in a similar way that I did beforehand. We're kind of, I think, wrestling between two goals here. One, we know that to achieve the level of transformation and the host of benefits that we want to achieve, we have got to see these funds leveraged many times over. Whether that's through additional state dollars, other programs, private entities, that from our perspective, to achieve transformation, and ongoing transformation, we need to see that level of investment beyond the state's original investment. But you raise a very fair point. How can community-based organizations and other organizations do that? And we would like to see and like to encourage partnerships. So between organizations and the state hopefully being able to come in to help make those partnerships where you have, again, communities like West Fresno, but other communities as well throughout the state. In LA, we're hearing many of the same things. I'll say the Inland Empire, for instance, and places like San Bernardino, Ontario. The state needing to come in as a broker or neutral party, as it were, to make sure that we're meeting those leverage goals and doing so in places that are most impacted. But you are absolutely right in pointing to the challenge, and we are still revising our guidelines.
My turn now. Okay. My name is Darren Miller, longtime Fresno resident. My question has to do with process, and it goes back to Mother Hensley's question about fairness. On your map, you identified the top 5% disadvantaged areas in Fresno. And as you can see, that map is very large. There's lots of residents, lots of area. My first question, it's a 2-part question. First question is, why was 5 the magic number to stop at, and why not start at 1? And then when you go to the fairness part of it, when you start talking about these monies and the most needy neighborhoods, the most impact, you can't start with a better number than 1. So possibly, is there a way, second part question is there a way or formula to go back in there using the data that you have and the resources to identify the number 1 most disadvantaged areas and start with the $70 million there, and if there's any leftover monies, then move to level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, so the most disadvantaged areas are not left out.
Mm-hmm. Another good question. So, and let me be clear, because part of this is somewhat of a misunderstanding of the tool. So CalEnviroscreen is a statewide tool. It is not a tool that was designed or intended to measure differences at the granularity of a local jurisdiction. It does do that, but what's set out in statute, law that was passed some years ago, directing benefits to disadvantaged communities, was done really looking at different parts of the entire state. It's census tract based. There's over 8,000 census tracts in the state of California. And there is a tremendous amount of of need, both here in Fresno and outside of Fresno. You're right. There's a lot of numbers that could have been chosen. And just so you know, the majority of stakeholders around this program when it was being formed, they want more. They think that 5% is way too focused. I get flack when I go outside of this city, for instance, when I'm in LA, when I'm in the Inland Empire, when I'm certainly in the Bay Area, saying, why are you focusing this on 5%? It needs to be 10%. Needs to be, the statute says 25%. The statute, the law of California for disadvantaged communities is 25%. So it's a way of answering your question. We're trying to strike a balance because we are a state agency who, yes, we want to be intentional about getting at and addressing the impacts of the most disadvantaged communities, but we're a large state. We have other goals that we want to achieve and other regions that we want to capture. And so we'll continue listening to comments because we're still revising our program, so your comment's a very important one, but just know that we're hearing a lot of other comments in many other directions, meaning opening it up more, raising that number in different parts of the state too. But thank you for that.
Good evening. My name is Christopher Vincent. So my question has something to do with both accountability as well as fairness. So please correct me if I'm wrong. Fresno's been allocated this lump sum of money, and from what I'm hearing, we don't know exactly what we're going to do with it as of right now. Guidelines have yet to be set. So my question is, what system of checks and balances or an auditing system will be put in place so that we can ensure, and the people of this community can be assured that the funds were allocated justly and they were put to channels where they need to go. That way, when the funds are gone, the people of this community aren't looking around saying what adjustments or improvements were made and the funds have disappeared.
That is quite the question. Thank you. Thank you for that. And it's a difficult question. So I'll answer it in a couple of ways. This program, Transformative Climate Communities, for the first time of any of our state's climate investments, is putting in place accountability measures through what are called indicators. Indicators that will point to measurable ways to assess the outcomes of the dollars that we invest. We are requiring that both upfront and how we measure accountability for wherever those dollars go. We are building that into the design of our program. Now, I kind of the nature of your question is sort of I can answer that today. We aren't in a place where we're looking 1, 2, 3 years out, and so I recognize that it's easy for me to say that now, and we'll need to prove that is the case as the investments play out. But I can tell you that that is part of the design of our program, or at least we intend for it to be, and we are still designing the guidelines for the program. But we want to see, again, specific ways to measure all of the outcomes that are defined by the communities that apply, by the applicants that do apply. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Stacy Williams, and I have a question. I was at the guidelines meeting that we had in Sacramento a couple weeks ago, and the question I have is on the technical assistance and the application process, because there are some funds that are supposed to go to the community so they can start with research and application and technical assistance. What is the guidelines for that so that we can make sure, sorry, am I talking loud? How long are we going to have for the community to have access to that technical assistance in the application process? Because as we know, there's a few politicians in the room right now that are already working on their research and their stuff, and they have their ducks in a row. Where's the community's access to that technical assistance and application so that we can catch up with the politicians like Baines and Swearingen who are already 10 steps ahead of the community?
A good question. So, and let me just clarify here. So, we have, just to put the dollars out there once again, $140 million for TCC. This is the $70 million for the implementation grants, 35 in LA, 35 in this third location. We also have the $1.5 million for planning and, basically developing or furthering planning efforts, the capital P. And then we have $2 million apart from that, and this was established legislatively, for technical assistance. We are refining the scope of what will be an RFP, a request for proposals for technical assistance now. Our technical assistance program is not just for TCC. It is for all of our state's climate investments. We are, TCC is obviously the subject here and now, but there's a host of other investments in the that we know we need to help prepare communities to apply for. And so I can't share with you the specific timeline for that today because we haven't finalized it yet. In the next couple weeks, I'm hoping we can get that out on the street. Our timeline so far has been, we made a request for information about 3 weeks ago, and that is basically, we made a call for all entities who provide technical assistance, including SGC, but all entities statewide. We've received interest from over 41 entities across the state. This is folks who are skilled at doing everything from capacity building to quantifying greenhouse gas emission reductions to piecing together projects. We needed to get a better sense of the landscape of the experts statewide, and now we will bring them in and develop requests for proposals, as I mentioned, based upon that interest. So if you can bear with us a couple more weeks, we are getting a lot out of the door in a very short amount of time. We're trying to design a program. We're trying to design this other technical assistance program, and we are working as diligently as we can because we understand and hear the need, and not just from communities here, but communities across the state. Well, we're hoping to make the technical assistance dollars available as soon as we can. Now, when you say ample time, it's obviously time is ticking, and so we recognize that. But our technical assistance will be both sort of pre-concept, so before the guidelines are finalized, and again, we're working through what that looks like. Definitely technical assistance during the concept phase, so when we release the concept application and have a full application, and then afterwards as well. So we do intend to have technical assistance at each of those components, including the run-up to finalizing the guidelines.
Hello, my name is Sterling Johnson. I have a question about the greenhouse gases. And Fresno has a large transportation center. You have all these truck companies parked over here, and then you have the two railroads. Are you going to bring into any questions about Tier 4 compliance for all these diesels engines here in Fresno and the surrounding area?
That is a very good idea. And I say it's a very good idea, and I actually say that pretty seriously because, again, as the state, we aren't in a position, I think, through this program to dictate the types of projects that we want to fund. We'll set up guidelines, and we'll, very clear parameters along with accountability for those parameters. But we would hope that community members such as yourself would bring to light issues such as that. The Air Resources Board, which is one of our partners, does fund programs to address high levels of emissions from freight and other heavy-duty transport. So, I could envision a scenario where that could be a fundable component, but again, that is not for me to decide.
Okay, I was just talking about the units that are parked, because my son drives for a major trucking company, and a lot of times he has to run his, when he's parked, he has to run his tractor to keep warm or keep cool.
Idling.
Yeah.
Idling ice.
And same thing with these, when you go over here to Burlington Northern or UP, you'll see about 40 or 50 diesel locomotives idling. And so that contributes a lot to the greenhouse gases also. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a very good thing I think to point to and to call out. I'll say, so yes, again, we aren't going to dictate the specific project, but would really encourage you and others to sort of think about that issue in a way that's related to other types of investments. This gets to the comment that I made earlier, and that was raised a number of times, about integrated investments. And so I hear you on the issue and the challenge, but I think we need to, and we would like to encourage you to think through other types of ways to address those issues, and investments specifically.
And let me just jump in. I just got the note that our time is almost up, so we have probably time for 2, maybe 3 more questions.
Okay. Randall, I need to ask you some questions. Now, why is it that you and everybody at the state level keep accepting people that's coming from Fresno, so far as Swearinger and whoever else, to speak for the community? They don't have community meetings to ask us about this. Not only that, I keep hearing you talk about bringing in other people, to get with other people, to get with groups, but you're not speaking about the community. This is affecting the community. When are you gonna come down and have a community meeting? You're supposed to be started at 5:30, you didn't do it. So we getting limited once again. So I want you to answer those questions.
Very, very fair questions, and again, I want to thank you for your candor and being direct. I hope that I'm transparent, and I will stay as long as I need to speak with you directly. I apologize on behalf of SGC and our council members, and I'll just blame myself if that was perceived as we've not been here enough. We haven't been listening to you enough. I'm not from Fresno, obviously. I have a lot to learn and a lot to listen to. So I am trying. That number one. Number two, there is still time, and we absolutely can and are open to coming here and coming to other places as needed. In terms of the representation of the needs here in Fresno and different parts of the community. We're in Sacramento, obviously. We hear from a host of different individuals, and there's an echo chamber that's created where we have to filter comments, and we do that the best that we can. And obviously, it's not directly here in the community. So that's part of why I wanted to come here today. I know it's not meeting, as you've expressed, everything that I think we need to meet by way of listening, but it's I hope, a step, and I certainly hope to and plan to take additional steps to hear what the concerns are and hopefully build that again into our program. So I've got time. I know we're almost out of time here, but I look forward to speaking with you after this session.
Hello there, sir. My name is Kyle Hunt. I also live here in Fresno. My question is particularly about the pollution, more so the industrial buildings that impact the area. With this plan, how do you exactly go about intending to remove it from the area where people inhabit the area and to keep it from impacting anyone else in the city?
So another good question. I think a general issue raised about the pollution that's very real and measured by the tools that we've used even to identify the communities. I want to state again that though we have are developing guidelines to basically set the parameters for how community members, other organizations would apply to achieve those goals in terms of reducing pollution. We're going to set folks up to establish those sorts of strategies and projects to reduce pollution, but we aren't going to be kind of dictatorial, as it were, insofar as how that gets done. We're going to provide assistance. We want to provide technical assistance and support to get there. But we need to first finalize the program guidelines. So we are in a sort of design of the guideline stage right now. So the extent to which you can help us think through, okay, yes, we want to see the reduction of pollution here in the city of Fresno, but taking a step back from that, we want to see, okay, how can we design a program that helps us meet that end, that also maybe could be seen as a model in other parts of the state. So it's a challenge, and we want to work with you to do that. But we're in a sort of designing the program phase right now.
All right, we have time for our last two questions here. Can we just have him ask, Pastor, and then she can get a mic? Well, we want people in the back of the room to hear you too.
Thank you. Sorry, Pastor. That's okay. My name is Aline Reed, and my question, you have to excuse my ignorance because I'm not exactly sure exactly how the legislature works so far as when they decide they're going to pass something. But if you're talking about disenfranchised communities, have they thought about doing the due diligence when they do? Okay, so SCG decided, okay, $70 million for Fresno, but have you done the due diligence to find out the who's, the where's, the people that you're going to be dealing with, the reputations of the groups that you're going to be dealing with? And this might have been answered before when you said, okay, we're going to track it and all of that. Fresno, Southwest Fresno has a history of not getting the money that has been designated for them, and so a lot of people are nervous about that. I don't want to overstate it, but not everybody is for you just because they say they're for you. And so a lot of people, a lot of community members, like my 98-year-old mother, is very nervous about this. We've got the environmental racism, we've got Darling International, we've got landfill, we've got all these things. And so now that the money is coming, people are getting antsy. You have Central Valley Community Foundation, they have a lot of people on their board, but we don't know that they're going to have Southwest Fresno as a priority. We don't know that. And so we want to make sure that we're at the table when these decisions are being made. So I'm just wondering, legislatively, are they looking at any of this stuff? I mean, are these people and these groups being vetted? Have community members been asked? Now that Fresno's been chosen, talk to the people. This is what Brunette's talking about, and this is what a lot of us who live here for a long time are talking about. We want to be at the table when these decisions are made to make sure that you not just hear us, but really listen. There's a history here of the disadvantage, and so we want to be heard, really, and have an action taken after you've heard us.
So, and thank you for that question. And I think you brought up a series of issues that are important. So from the standpoint of the legislation, that led to the establishment of prioritizing the 5%, and in turn, the SGC in the fall, chose based upon the 5%, so wasn't digging that much further, but chose to allocate the funds in Fresno and LA in a third location. So we were kind of learning throughout those processes. And since we released the guidelines, now we are at a stage where we are doing just that, meaning getting to know and then better understand the communities and the partners. That doesn't really, at least to this point, reside with the legislator as it does with implementing agencies such as the Strategic Growth Council. And I think all I can say is that we are listening and we are learning. And accountability will absolutely be core to this program. The guidelines spell out a collaborative stakeholder partnership. And we will have expectations with regard to collaboration. So that's maybe a short way of answering it, but you raised some very good points.
All right, we have our last
This will be
question.
our final question and response for the evening.
First, Mr. Winston, I want to thank you for coming on behalf of our community. My question is really dealing with capacity, the community's capacity to participate in this application process. So the concern is people are going to come forward, put together a proposal, but none of the people that live in this community, developers, contractors, suppliers, are going to be included in this project. This is an economic project, an infrastructure project. Things are going to be built. So as a minority contractor myself and other people in this community, the only way you're going to ensure that the building or the construction or the development, the improvement that's going to take place in this community is that we are directly involved in that process. So what are you going to put in place to make sure, as a parameter, that you recruit so many minority suppliers, contractors, vendors to be a part of that proposal in order to compete? Because if you don't do that, my brother Pastor Griner just wasted all this electricity.
Mm-hmm. I think you hit the nail on the head there in terms of what we are looking to require directly in our guidelines. Beforehand, just to be totally transparent, in some of the other states, all of the other states' climate investments, they did not include requirements with regard to local hire, workforce development and training, where those jobs needed to go. Some jurisdictions decided to do that, some did not, and the dollars were spent in ways that sometimes led to the benefits that you're talking about, and sometimes they did not. This program is different. We will include requirements, and I'm not going to say yet because we don't know where exactly they're going to be, but we want to make sure that the economic opportunities created through these investments accrue to not just local individuals, local residents, but that there is the capacity building, the training, the education, the workforce development to ensure that the jobs that are available are able to be taken up by local residents. And I can say right now, and there's nothing to sort of announce yet, but we are actively exploring partnerships both at the state level and other institutions that we can bring to bear here within the city and region of Fresno, regardless of what the result of the application is. We know that there's going to be jobs. We know that there will be projects. And we want to make sure that how this program is designed, that's calculated equitably in a way that I think you're speaking to. We will have to. Not only we are going to have it, and again, we're still designing it, so I couldn't list off to you right now exactly the metrics that we will list out, but rest assured that you will see it more fully fleshed out in the revised guidelines that, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to release next month. So thank you for that.
All right, well, listen, our time, and we're ending right about on time. I want to thank, first of all, Randall for coming out and answering all the questions. Listen, thank you very much, Randall. As you can see, very, very good discussion. And one of the big takeaways that hopefully people took away is that it's not done yet. So I think what I heard is A lot of people gave feedback and input. The final guidelines have not been set. So what I think you heard from Mr. Winston tonight was he appreciates your input, and all of that input will be taken into what will become the final draft guidelines. So for tonight, Darren, can we do this? Can we respect this, and we can come up afterward and maybe have a. I think we have. Is that on the handout?
Yeah, I'll make sure.
Okay.
We'll
make sure of that. We'll get your contact information. And one thing I want to say is this. The other thing I want to say is that this is not going to be the last discussion, right? So we're going to have a series of. There's a lot of discussion about community involvement. So there is a TCC steering committee. We will have a series of meetings that allow community involvement and to input in the process. After the guidelines are set, I think we're going to wait until the guidelines are set. That way we can allow people to give meaningful input into the process. So with that, I want to allow the pastor of this house to have the final word and blessing. Oh, you're saying Pastor Binion? Pastor Binion's going to have the final word and blessing.
My final word is good night and God bless you. And let's continue the process. Let's hold the folks accountable who should be. And let's prepare ourselves to see this to the end. Good night, everybody.